Hello and welcome to the Guitar Hang Podcast. I'm your host, John Stancorp. Today I have an incredible special guest, a true powerhouse in the Nashville Music Scene, Mr. Derek Wells. Derek's a CMA Producer of the Year and one of the most in-demand session guitarists in the business. Over the years, he's worked with some of the biggest names in country music, including Maren Morris, Blake Shelton, Carrie Underwood, Thomas Rhett, Jelly Roll, Post Malone, and many more. Whether he's behind the board as a producer or laying down some of the greatest guitar parts in the studio, his contributions have shaped the sound of modern country music. His versatility, creativity, and unmatched talent have made him a true force in both the studio and on stage. It's my pleasure to welcome the incredible Derek Wells to the show.
Yeah.
But all is well, man.
Yeah. It's a return to your vaudeville roots, right? Spinning
Exactly.
plate spinning on a stick and the
Well, I just don't want to get the hook, is really
right. Yeah.
as long as I can avoid that, we're in a good spot here. So
That's a very good spot. Well, congratulations on Producer of the Year. That's exciting, right?
Thank you, man. Yeah, thank you.
That's doing a little bit of my homework and checking out some previous interviews. It's a great narrative, starting off very young, having a mother and a father that are in the business and deciding that you want to get into something like this. And if you could go back in time and tell the 12-year-old you that not only would you be excelling in the world of studio guitar, but you'd be Producer of the Year, considering the guys that were your heroes that you're standing on the shoulders of, like Dean Huff.
Yeah, absolutely.
To do the top calls session guitar thing and then producing. It's a very exciting progression for you, I'm sure.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, it's it's been great, and I get asked a lot, especially on the production thing. People will say, was that always the goal? Like, did you always? Man, it honestly wasn't. Like it's the next steps in my career, luckily have kind of just always kind of revealed themselves when the universe thought I was ready for it. Because I just wanted to make a living playing guitar. I mean, it's, when I was 17, 18, I just would rather make money playing guitar than waiting tables, which is what I was doing. And it just started, literally from that of like, man, wouldn't it be great if I could do this for a living? And then it was like, wow, wouldn't it be cool if I could do this for a living with somebody people know? And then that led to kind of some touring, and then that led to the studio thing, and then ultimately the production was exactly the same way. It just was like, people's records and collaborating with them on their sessions. And eventually some folks started to ask,
right,
hey, would you want to do this? Hey, would you, and so I really truly just walking through the doors that got opened up for me,
Yeah. There's probably other parallels in other businesses, but nothing more pronounced than the career path that you took, as far as the idea of wanting to just play guitar as a young guy. Man, I just want to play guitar.
Yeah.
While you've done all those things, all the things that you have to learn along the way in terms of the team mentality, how to read the room, how to understand a producer's perspective, how to understand the artist's perspective, getting input from a record company where you're kind of like, oh my gosh,
Oh yeah, yeah.
There's all these things. Kind of the analogy of spinning plates is very apt. There's a lot of hats you have to wear, a lot of tap dancing, a lot of jumping through flaming hoops.
Yeah, definitely. I would say most of the hoops are on fire at this point.
Right. Well, especially now more than ever, I think the stakes are so high. It's a different playing field. I don't know that it's level or unlevel. I mean, I'm not in the world that you are, but it seems like in the world of streaming, there's still obviously a lot of recording going on. There's a lot of independent stuff happening right now.
Yep. And really just the pace of it. I mean, you mentioned the high stakes, and that's true. But man, it's just become so much more of a reactive business.
Right.
Even fortunately, unfortunately, whatever, even the art part of it, is it's even when I first started kind of working in record world, you would go and you would make the music, and then people would hear the music internally, and you would kind of create this rollout plan, and there was always a plan, right? It was always this, you know, a strategy and all this kind of stuff. And nowadays it's so much more like, hey, I wrote this song 2 days ago and I played, there's a video of me playing it on acoustic guitar on the internet and it's blowing up. Like, we've got to get this recorded yesterday.
Yeah.
And so, and that makes juggling the scheduling really hard because, again, a decade ago, it was so much easier to look at my schedule like a month or two out and see like, oh, okay, cool, I got 2 or 3 days on this record and 2 or 3 days, and like kind of you could look at it and see, an overarching view of what you were going to be dug in on for a while. And those still happen, and there are still, like, particularly some of the more premier artists have the luxury of time.
Mm-hmm.
But very often, if you have new emerging artists or artists really starting to peak, man, there's such an emphasis on getting the stuff done and turned out and turned around. And so in that regards, the stakes are high because you have to perform, at a high level and get this stuff done. We don't always have the luxury of sitting around and smoking a joint and thinking of cool parts. It's like, you're there to work and you're there to get the stuff done.
Yeah, it's interesting if you watch documentaries or read books, see these old photos of like back in the day when Billy Sherrill was producing, Tammy Wynette, whoever that may be.
No.
And it seemed like a very low key affair. You'd have the artist at the piano, and you'd have over his shoulder or his or her shoulder the producer, and it was a very organic thing. Then they would bring in some of the players, and they would kind of run down the songs. It seems like now one artist could have a team of like 10 people, and there's different people that are contributing to these tracks.
Yeah.
So you've got 10 different potential horses pulling in different directions to get one thing made. And you're like what you're saying, it was needed to be done yesterday. So it seems like in some ways the pressure is a bit greater than at any other time before.
Yeah, there is, and also too, we're living in a moment where there's not a lot about music that feels new to people.
Right.
If anything, we're in a more of a cyclical nature. But like, I think bluntly, like, it's harder to impress a new listener than it would have been, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, because there was still such a marvel of, the technology happening to them, the music itself was great and masterfully done too, but the experiential nature of buying something and listening to it and all this kind of stuff. And there was so much more to kind of like sink the hooks in on a listener about, it was revolved around the experience than now, like kind of the playlist mentality. And so, that's the thing that's not lost is, we're moving fast and we're being reactive, but it's also, in my opinion, it's like almost harder than ever to like grab someone sonically and play something they haven't heard, or maybe that's not the way to say it, but maybe to play something that's super compelling,
right?
That makes a listener lean in. And so, and that's what I think my job is, and most of the people that I, get lucky enough to work for, is it's like, okay, yeah, I get it. It's all these, it's like those chef shows, right? It's like, it's like, it's high pressure, and it's because there's a, we're on the clock, so to speak, and there's all these moving parts that are happening around us and stuff. But at the end of the day, like, I still have to try to plate a compelling dish. And that's really that's really what I feel like I'm doing, anytime I'm in a studio these days. Because the old days, you just throw shit at the wall forever and try stuff, and it didn't work. I don't know. Let's come back to it tomorrow. Right. It's like, it's not really that way anymore.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned the thing about the cooking shows, because there's a meme, not a meme, but a little short of these two comedians, Peel and Key,
Yeah.
and one guy is judging the other guy's food, and he's saying
Oh,
one,
I've seen it. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
one really bad thing. It seems like, well, that pretty much sums up the experience of what you're doing as well. It could be the same analogy could be.
Yeah. Yeah. You're just, and like I said, it's still back to the compelling, because your instinct there is always, when you feel, I guess I can't speak for everybody, but for myself and a lot of the guys I feel like I interface with, like when you feel the time crunch, like your instinct is to like get the stuff that is a sure thing out there.
Yeah.
It's kind of like those, I'm in a pinch here.
Right.
I'm gonna make a burger. And,
Right.
and it's gonna be a great burger, but I'm gonna make a burger. And it's hard to kind of take the breath and go, all right, okay, hold on. I got to do something compelling here. I know I've only got 45 minutes or what, whatever it is for a certain thing, or in that moment, I've only got this session or this day or whatever it is. But, that's the kind of, again, the inner game of tennis part of this whole thing, where you're
Right.
like, well, yeah, I mean, I know how to go play a track safely and not make any mistakes and give you, serviceable music. And some people might even enjoy that.
Right.
That might be just great for a lot of people. But I just personally feel like I'm there to contribute something that's
Right.
That adds to the soup in a compelling way, and makes people want to lean in.
Right. Yeah, it seems like the musical acumen that you've built up over the years is obvious, but the things that you have to do, your interpersonal people skills in producing, that's I I would think that for a lot of people, if you put the time in and really were focused on becoming really proficient on your instrument, if you really lean into it, yes, it can be done. But the people thing, not everybody can be a producer. So
Sure.
if there's a finite, small, tiny percentage of guys that could ever become a top call studio guitar player, there's even a smaller percentage of people that can do the producing gig. It'd be a hard seat to be in, fulfilling on one hand, but also very challenging, I would think.
Yeah, well, because I mean, I think your point is really, really great. It's we'd all love to think it's only about the music, and it's just really not.
Right.
And I have dear friends and you know coworkers or collaborators that thought they wanted to be producers, or even thought they wanted to be session players,
Yeah.
until some of the realities of the interpersonal stuff goes on. Because yeah, like making a great record, and like making a record that sonically sounds competitive, and it's something you can be proud of, and pleasing your artist, that's just like one slice of the pie.
Right. Yeah.
The job of a producer. And there's also, you have to be a good partner and interface with their team. You have to have conversations with their managers and their record labels and sometimes their publishers, and sometimes you're stuck in the middle. It's easy sometimes to get in these love triangles of what the artist wants versus what the label wants. And again, we'd all love to think that stuff just naturally aligns all the time.
Right.
And that if you just go make a record that your artist loves, and you do it at a high level, and you turn that in, that everybody's going to be great. And it can happen that way. But it's rare. Those are the exceptions, and you're thankful for the exceptions.
Yeah.
You're thankful for some of those artists that, you feel like the teams all give you a wide berth, and the artist is a great advocate for themselves, and everyone's just on the same page. And it can happen. But yeah, man, it's tough, particularly when you're the new guy and you don't have any kind of real track record. Because
Right.
even for someone like myself, like me saying I've played on X amount of number one songs as a guitar player isn't the same as saying
Right.
that I've produced number one hits. And even those things, I think I probably got a fairer shake than most because of my track record as a studio musician.
Right.
But there were still projects early on that, I could feel everyone, I could feel that this was a test drive.
Oh, yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
like, well, okay. I mean, we love Derek. Yeah. Well, let's see if he can do this too, So, yeah, there's a lot more to it than just the music.
Yeah, there's so many doors that are open for all the things that preceded, but the door into that new thing
Yeah.
is now you're under a whole new different type of scrutiny that you were back in the day that you're doing a session with Gordon Mote and those guys, all your heroes, a
Yeah.
different kind of thing. But internally, you're feeling like, yeah, this is a natural progression for me. But in some ways, maybe I'm starting at zero now. I have to reset the counter, to do my.
Yeah, that's a real thing. And I don't, I don't know a lot of musicians that haven't at least, brushed up against imposter syndrome. Maybe they don't, suffer from it, but, definitely understand that thing. And yeah, it's that thing because, the jobs are really specific. It's, being a quarterback is not the same job as being a coach. And on a Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlapping skill sets, but they are two different jobs at the end of the day. And the other thing too is, again, like one of those jobs, the blessing of the days when I just play guitar is it's like, I really just kind of do my thing and I leave. And,
Right.
I'm going to try my best to leave you with great stuff and leave a plated meal that I can be super proud of. But at the end of the day, it's not if they take that to the customer and the customer's like, I don't really like this, it's not my problem.
Right. Yeah.
And producer part, you really are that kind of last line of defense where, if someone's got an issue with the way a track came out or a vocal performance or a mix or any of those kinds of things, like you're the guy that's got to, bear that and problem solve and figure out how to get everybody happy.
Yeah, and I think your sports analogy is a fair one because it definitely puts you as producer in that kind of head coach position because you've got the owner and the GM, then you've got your quarterback and the rest of the team. But even more importantly, the fans.
Right. Yeah.
The Sunday morning after you're eliminated from the playoffs or you're not going to the playoffs, that Monday morning after is a real tough gig.
Yeah.
It didn't go well because now you're But I would think that maybe not directly, but maybe indirectly, and you could speak to this, having your dad having that great fortuitous move into a producer's role with Dolly and starting on his career, you were able to kind of see his transformation happening while you're still doing the studio thing. So that's something that kind of informed. I mean, you kind of got a preview of what that would be, I suppose.
Well, I definitely got a preview of, what the pressures, would be in that regard. And, but, and he would tell you this, it's like the lens at which some of, a legacy artist like Dolly, at which they view success or failures on some of those things isn't quite as applicable to like, some of the more current things. So yeah, plainly, like there's things that Dolly just isn't worried about, like radio play, for instance, and so yeah, still pressure because it's a really high level act and it's somebody everyone's familiar with, and Dolly is iconic and she's amazing and all this stuff, but again, my pops would tell you the same thing. He didn't really have anybody, regional radio reps coming back saying, this intro feels a little R&B. Can we do a remix? And that kind of stuff. So those were all new and profound problems I had to find all on my own.
Right. Yeah. So that generationally, there's enough of a chasm between him doing his gig and you doing yours. Yeah.
But what I really did, but what I always learned from my pops and again, like heroes like Dan or like, you know, even a guy like Tony Brown, whatever, it was like the dudes that had come from the player world and moved into that. And I do think it gives you a very unique perspective on how to keep your players happy, because you know what they're feeling on the, and maybe happy is not the word, but keeping them in it, especially when if you're having a moment where people are getting bogged down.
Yeah.
You know, I do think it's a useful tool that, you know, when you're in the control room and you're kind of having these conversations with an artist and you feel a track kind of going this way, or maybe potentially kind of coming off the rails, like it's definitely helpful to know, like, man, I know what that guy's feeling out there right now, because I've
been there,
you know,
right?
he's been playing this song for 15 minutes and nobody's said anything to him on the top, you know, and I definitely picked up a lot of those tricks from my pops, and again, guys like Dan Huff that were just, you know, great players and then moved into that role, and being able to communicate with our session musician brethren and sisterin.
Yeah. Yeah, nothing can feel more like Siberia than being working on a part for 15 minutes and not hearing anything in the talk.
Oh man, there's lonesome, you know, I mean, it's you know, it's because, you know, there's also just this whole conversation to be had about, you know, studio musicians, and it's I think oftentimes there's a misconception that we show up and play whatever we feel like.
Right.
And it's like, cool, glad you got to hear me, you know, here's where you send the check. And man, it's even on people who are, you know, your beloved and trusted collaborators, that is just so rarely to never the case. You know, like you know, anybody can go to the batting cage and slam homers if they're getting 70-mile-an-hour pitches down the middle over and over. But
Oh, yeah.
You know, the batting analogy there is like, on sessions, there's an actual pitcher pitching against you.
Yeah.
And you know, you don't know what pitch is coming, and you gotta, you know, alter those things. And honestly, maybe sometimes you never get your pitch, you know, and in that, and in those days, you know, you're really just trying to get, you know, single base hits, and, you know, maybe eke out a double here and there and hope that the team wins, you know, because it's maybe not a guitar song, or
Right.
or there's other considerations or whatever. And it's like, well, you can only hit your pitches, right?
Yeah. And if there are times I'm sure that you're playing with folks that you've played with a lot, and then there's times that it's a new, you might be subbing for somebody, and the first time you're running a song down and the drummer is feeling it one way,
Exactly.
bass player is feeling it another way, and you might have your own kind of preconceived ideas. It's kind of like the manner with which you stay composed, move forward, get a good take that's a tricky thing for everybody to kind of be in the same headspace. And I guess that's really why guys like yourself and all the other players that we're referring to, the Nashville elite players, it's their playing, but it's also how are they going to handle that type of situation, being able to bring energy, positive energy, you know, stay focused, be a team player, that whole vibe, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's funny you bring that up, because like I have a phrase for that. I always say, like, you know, there are some days where you show up and, you know, everybody in there was listening to different records when they drove in.
Right. Yeah.
And that is, you know, that is just kind of what happens, because you know, you naturally, like, we're all fans of music first and foremost, you know, we love music, which is why we became musicians. And man, it's amazing how, you know, just subconsciously you are influenced by your mood, or your, like, again, I mean, it's kind of a joke, but it's also very real, of like what you listened to when you drove in that day can cause you to interpret a song more like a ballad. Or you might, you know, for drummers, like, you know, if they were listening to Steely Dan on the way in,
Right. Yeah.
you know, they're going to interpret things a little bit, you know, differently, and whatever. And so in those moments, you know, that's when it's just helpful to like take a deep breath. Because I've had, there's like that first take thing you've described, like there so many times I've been playing the song and we're like in the second verse and I'm like, holy shit, there's not two of us in here playing the same song right now.
Right.
And and sometimes the gang is aware of it, sometimes we're not. All of us are guilty of having our heads up our own butts from time to time.
Yeah.
But that's when you just kind of, if it's me, I'll kind of frame the thing, I'll kind of ask these open to the room questions when I take like that ends and go,
Right. Yeah.
so hey, is this supposed to rock, or are we like, are we keeping it down? And then try to invite some more direction from, the, whoever's in charge, or the producer, or the whatever. And then if I'm the producer, again, that's part of my job, is to just to know that, like, oh, the keys player is interpreting it as this type of song, and I just need to get the verbiage together to be able to communicate to him that, like, hey man, I don't know that it's such a piano thing as it is like a B3 thing, and not just a B3 thing. It's like this type of, like, not gospel B3, but like Coldplay Patty B3. It's the, and you want to kind of have those tools in your toolbox to get the ship right. Because yeah, dude, I've definitely felt those, like, ooh, none of us listen to the same radio station on the way in today.
Yeah.
And then the flip of that is, occasionally you walk in and you get those moments, and that's what I call it, feels like driving a race car. It's like you have those moments when a bunch of high level musicians are inspired in a really like natural way, organic way, by a song, and everyone goes out there and they're playing the same song.
Right.
And that's when, those are the moments you look around and you go, well, damn, these are the best guys in the world. Shit.
Right. Absolutely. And I would think that one of your skills that you're able to cultivate is when you're bringing in players for a particular session, you do have some choice, and you get too many alpha males in the room that are kind of doing this thing. It can be very combustible. So I would think that a lot of these players, and they're, I don't know if peculiarity is the right word, but there's certain things about them that you might know that two particular players may not be the best suited for a certain session.
Absolutely. And even not even just like from a pure personality standpoint, but that goes into the playing. Like there's a conversation I heard from like Justin Niebank, the engineer, and Dan Huff. And there's this kind of idea that's like, well, everything in a track can't be the meal, right? Like there's got to be some sides.
Yes.
And it's like, and to that point, I do think players can be that way too. And it's, we're so fortunate in Nashville that, everyone here is great, and they can certainly be like brilliant soloists and play, at really, really high levels. And they can also, almost all of them, when asked to, play very supportive roles.
Right.
What I think of is just trying to cast, the personalities and the bigger voices, and it's like sometimes you kind of know, like, okay, I got this guy and this guy, and they are really going to be the meals of these tracks.
Yeah.
And even though some of the other guys are capable of being meals, I think that's my part of the conversation, is to go to this guy and go, hey man, like, maybe it's keys, and just say like, hey, like, full disclosure, like, this isn't a Bruce Hornsby record. Like, we're not doing any piano ballads. Like, I'm going to really lean on you for glue.
Right.
And like this, that's what that's what we need you for on this song or this project or for this artist. And that's the thing, or going to an acoustic or going to a guitar. I mean, and again, I've lived this, but like having conversations with electric guitar players and just saying like, hey, I know this isn't like guitar music, like we're not rocking here, but here are the great roles I think you can play. And like, this is going to be like really rhythm section forward, it's going to be a lot of drums and percussion. And like, I think you could be the most useful at this thing and this thing. And like, that's what I'd love to hear, if that helps you go in the right headspace. And so yeah, you know, I mean, it's like, and yeah, to your original point, sometimes it is just kind of alphas. Like sometimes there's too many roosters in the hen house,
Yeah.
and that is. But what I find way more often than not is just making sure that, you know, from a musical standpoint, you know, the people that are supposed to be the big meals of the song or the record or the artist understand that, like, hey, this is going to be a lot of heavy lifting on you. Like,
Yeah.
this is going to be a lot of these songs are this type of song and this, and it's really going to rely on what you do. And I really want to hear you come out of it, and I want to hear your voice come out of it,
Right.
and X and Y and Z. And then same communicating to the other guys, like, hey, dude, I know you're brilliant. I need you, you know, playing synth bass today instead of like, yeah, I know you can play Stevie Wonder bass, but like this
Right.
is this is where we're at for this type of thing. And you know, and not that these amazing musicians aren't capable of making that discernment on their own a lot too. You know, they certainly are great at knowing, you know, reading the room and knowing, you know, when to step out and when not to.
Yeah. I've been teaching guitar for about 35 years, and the one thing that I always thought for myself that I would have loved to have been able to take a course on, or even have my students now, is if there was a way that in a real session that you could watch a top call studio guitarist dial in tones, because now more than ever we're living in such a gear centric world, and there's presets for everything.
Yeah.
There's, you know, AC30 preset, you know, Mesa Boogie preset. Most of the folks that are buying these units that have these presets have never heard the original first.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Trying to sculpt sounds that by themselves sound amazing.
Yeah.
And then but even in a live context, it's like you have to know who you're playing with and sonically what frequencies are being gobbled up. But even more specifically with the home recording hobbyist,
Yeah.
what a player thinks is a really great tone.
Yeah.
And it would be great to have somebody like yourself illustrate that and say, okay, and just solo a track and say, here's what your track that you think sounds amazing, and here's what it would need to sound like to make it work in the big picture. Because
Yeah.
you hear isolated stems of like Brian May guitar things that you
Yeah.
thought amazingly fat tones. You
Yeah.
hear
Yeah. Yeah.
it and you're like, oh my God, it's the room, it's distant miking, it's near, you know, close up miking, it's all sorts of equalization happening. And so it would be interesting to hear from you. Is that something that you were dialed into at a young age, that idea of, man, I really want to get into knowing the ins and outs of EQ and being able to hear certain frequencies and be able to know how to get the best out of my gear?
Um, the simple answer is no. I mean, I think I always, you know, like uh my pops had a great line. It's like, well, you can't have good tone if you don't know what good tone sounds like. And I do think that, you know, there's a certain part of, you know, everyone's own natural ear that, you know, and your hands and, you know, whatever, that can kind of like pull a tone out of a guitar. Um, and you know, of course, like, you know, the kind of lowest hanging fruit, you know, is like their tone is thin, you know, that old
That old
moniker,
thing, yeah.
thin tone, you know. Um, but you know, combination, you know, just hours logged on the session world, and then also again, guys like Huff, and some brilliant engineers, guys like Justin Niebank, um, guys like Drew Bowman, and a lot of dudes I could list off, but like Joey Moy is another one that was huge for me in some of these things. Is like just understanding that like the like good tone is so like relational to the rest of the track.
Yes.
And I'll use an example is like there's a record that I co-produced an artist I work with named Hardy, and we had a record called Mockingbird and the Crow that came out last year, and there's a lot of like hard rock guitar stuff on there, and early 2000s type of thing, and I've had people in his band or people in the community ask like, so what was the setup for like the heavy guitars? And I could be like, well, it was probably one of these 2 amps and one of these 3 guitars and a combination of stuff. But we didn't have like, this is the heavy guitar sound,
Right.
because song to song, depending on the key of the song, depending on the bass player was using, the drum sound per song, like you do have to alter the EQ. And in my experience too, it's a little both. It's front end and back end. It's that point of sound on the amp or on the floor for me. And then there's usually some extra tweaking to be done after the fact, because that kind of like set it and forget it, here's my heavy guitar sound, to your point, like you could be in some room all by yourself and playing it, and I'm sure it sounds like God, but relationally to all the tonality of all the other instruments, and again, like the tonality of certain keys and certain tunings, and there's considerations for playing a song in C sharp if you're capoed up, or if you're playing closed, or if you have the guitar tuned down a step and a half and the strings get floppy. Like there are EQ moves and considerations that you have to make to account for those types of things. And so back to your original point in question, is it's like, and I'll make one more point, is like, Dan Huff was one of the guys early on for me that showed me how vital like some like small guitar sounds are.
Oh yeah.
He would have me, I'd be playing some part and he would have me like thin it out, like to the point where I was almost uncomfortable to play the part. Like it'd be like, yeah, can you just turn the bass off? And can you do this? And a little more presence and both. And are you on your bridge pickup? Like what? And I kind of almost be self-conscious in there doing it, until you go in the control room and you hear it in the sonic field, and you're like, oh, it's perfect. I hear everything I'm doing. And it's like, I hear every little nuance of the part now. It just speaks so clearly.
Yeah.
And that's hard stuff to talk about, because that's hours logged. That's real time pilot hours of just learning, over decades now at this point for me, of starting to realize like, oh, okay, there are going to be times when I need way less bass on this guitar track, or times when I got to roll off a lot of top end,
Right.
or whatever, it's there when you kind of cross into that, the final frontier of mid-range, and you really get invested in that and how that can look, and how these little small moves in frequencies can affect, guitar tones, and honestly, even to your point about like Brian May, like some of that stuff that, unique frequency stuff, because yeah, I can't imagine how many kids bought a Vox AC30 and tried to play the solo from Killer Queen and were like, this doesn't sound like that.
Yeah.
Because there's just a lot going on, it's studio, magic, and high level mic techniques and EQs, and
there's some phasing things that are happening. Roy Thomas Baker had these mics that are off axis and weird comb filtering or something going on, where it's like, that's not anything that you would know about until you hear like the isolated tracks. But it's very appealing to think, if I buy this box, would,
Well, I do think it's cool that some of that stuff exists. I had a thing recently where I was doing we did the Thanksgiving Day halftime show for Dolly last fall. And we were doing We Are the Champions.
I remember seeing that. Yeah.
And I literally used the and I've got this wall of amps over here, but I used the UA Ruby amp pedal
Oh yeah.
Because there's like a Brian May Queen thing in it, and like you just turn this, you turn the room, and it sounded like Queen, and it's like, look, man, I'm not going to take the long way around,
Yeah.
for my pride's sake. Like this is, you plug this thing in and it sounds like that record, and I mean, it's still your hands and it's still your guitar and whatever, but it got you, definitely got way down the field, and it's like, yeah, why would I?
Yeah.
I'm not going to beat myself up plugging in my Vox and trying to match EQ. It's right there. Presets right there. I'll just use it for that,
We have to thank James Santiago for that and all those.
Oh,
Really,
James, he's so great, man. Yeah, they let me beta test. I guess shameless plug. If anyone has those pedals, the Dream and the Ruby, there are like some presets of mine that I did
oh, nice.
early on. If you have those interface, you can check those out, because James and them sent me those early on in the kind of early testing phase, and those things sound great. Sound awesome.
Yeah. The one thing I was curious about, there was a period of time that you were describing in a previous interview where you would you're working a job, and but really we're starting to lean into practicing and really starting to think, man, this might be my thing. And you're buying a couple of CDs and just sitting down just with. Now, were you at the point where you would do some sort of notation? I don't know at this point that I don't think your parents had hipped you to the Nashville system yet, so I don't know that you're writing a number chart, but were you in some way notating like solos, riffs, or anything? Was it strictly just committing it to memory?
No, yeah, the earliest, the earliest parts of that was definitely just learning a song.
Yeah.
And sounding it out, and honestly, in hindsight, probably oftentimes wrong. Thinking you were playing it right, but not. But it was in that kind of era, that like my late teens thing, where I think my folks did start to see that I was getting really serious about it, and there was like an offhanded like, if you're for real, you need to go buy this book. It's called The Nashville Number System by Chad Williams, and you should go get it, and you should start. So again, really fortunate. They kind of planted that bug early for me. And so, that became pretty quickly part of the process. I was like 18, 19. And I was, to your point, I would go to like Walmart, because you just had to go, like I would go buy CDs, and, I'd buy like a contemporary or classic country record. And then I would go buy like an Incubus record or something that wasn't.
And I was around like 2000 or so, roughly 1990.
Yeah, it should have been like 01 or 02.
Yeah.
And I would go do that, and I'd come home and I would try to write the charts, and sometimes I didn't quite get it right. But I would just started working that way. And then and then trying to learn the parts and just trying to tone match, like, wonder how he got his guitar to sound like this, and doing that thing, and just chasing that. And I mean, again, it was still like, quite a long time before I was out like as a working musician from that point. But that's kind of how that all kind of started to happen at the same time.
Well, that's very fortuitous, because to learn Mike Einzinger's stuff from Incubus and then Brent Mason on Chattahoochee or something like that.
I mean, that was literally it. Like those were the things that I was working on at that time in my life. Was like, here's these like whatever, like Jody Messina records, like these pop country or classic country things, or George Strait songs or Merle Haggard songs. And then I was, to your point, in Incubus or a Buck Cherry world, and there's classic rock too. I was learning AC/DC records at the same time and that kind of stuff. And I would just try to, at that point, I was committing myself to wanting to be a working musician.
Yeah. I mean,
I just felt like the more stuff I could do, the better situation I was going to be in,
What informs your vocabulary? I mean, to your point, now you're in a session where you're describing something and you're using a vernacular about, no, it's more of a Coldplay organ.
Yeah.
You're using because to get to the place where you are now, your antenna has to be up and so finely tuned to everything, and trying to take in everything and kind of categorize it into, you know, remembering things and being able to make a reference for an old Roy Orbison record, perhaps, but then something that was really recent or something. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah. And I mean, and you can't, you can definitely get lost in the reference chasing. But for me, I just always thought of it as like, I just don't want to be the wrong guy in the band. And like, as amazing as he is, like you wouldn't hire Angus Young to come play on a Sean Colvin record.
no,
And so for me, I just wanted to have like an understanding of the role that my instrument would play
yeah,
when someone said a reference or when I heard certain songs, because yeah, you can't, you know, play like, Zach Wild on a George Strait record, bluntly. And there's a million other cross
yeah,
references there too. And even if you are an astounding enough musician to be able to kind of fake that
yeah,
in a convincing way, like it's still not like authentic.
yeah.
And so, like I probably wouldn't play a Les Paul and a Marshall on a D'Angelo track or whatever, and so
And it would be a little off-putting to have John Leventhal come out and play Hell's Bells with the school.
I mean, straight up. And honestly, I bet Leventhal would sound fucking awesome because that guy's incredible.
Yeah.
But
yeah, outfit would be a little, yeah.
Yeah. But it, but yeah, it is, that was just always the consideration that I had of just like, man, I just wanted to be a player's player.
Yeah.
That's the biggest, to be honest, the biggest takeaway I took from my parents and kind of watching their journey was like how great everybody was.
Yeah.
And I had a very real understanding of where the bar for musicianship was in this town, specifically in Nashville. And I didn't want to embarrass myself.
Yeah.
Plainly, I didn't want to be embarrassed. And so, it was, I took all the reps I could possibly get. And tried to diversify myself as much as I possibly could, so that when I would be put in situations of thrown into some musical thing that I didn't, have no clue of how to, again, my role in a band like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's an amazing story. And I admire the fact that for guys like Gordon Kennedy and his dad, and for you and your dad, to have that kind of thing, that connective thing. So when you're, not that you're talking about music all the time, but you guys have a connection and a bond, having walked the same path at different times and through different landscapes. But it's a shared thing that very few folks have with their dad. And that's an amazing.
Well, we've really cracked that code, especially honestly, like even, I mean, I'll be 41 this year. And like, honestly, like really just in the last handful of years, because, first and foremost, when I was a kid growing up, I thought it was the least cool job on the planet. I was like, this is some cockamamie shit here. Like you guys are always gone, and like you're too like missing birthdays and football games and stuff. And like my, response all the time was like, people were like, so is Derek going to do music? And I'd be like, no way, I'm getting a real job. Like, these guys are idiots. And then, there was when I decided to try to, throw my hat in the ring and do it, him and my mom too, I mean, they were scared. They were legitimately worried because they know how hard it is.
Yeah.
And they also know that like, you can't help your kids the way that some people might assume you can. And if and if anyone out there questions that, like, go look at any of these celebrities, of these famous musicians and their children. And it's like, very rarely does the child of one of them become some actual superstar. And because if it was, people like John Lennon's kid would be the biggest act in music. It's not that simple.
Right.
And so they were really scared and, concerned if I could do it and how hard it would be and all these things. I got a late start and all that stuff. And so, it really wasn't till, the last decade or so. And, I've been lucky enough to have some, I don't want to call it real success, but maybe some tangible success. You get these things on the walls and you get some stuff. And I think it took them being able to get to that point and breathe a sigh of relief of like, whew, Derek did it. Okay. And now it is a little, you can kind of like, I'll call Pops after a rough session and be like, man, the engineer today, he's like, oh, that's the worst. And we really didn't have that until very
Yeah.
recently. I think again, where we're both at in our careers, and then them being able to feel like they can relax, that like, okay, Derek
Yeah.
made it, he's all right.
Yeah.
And all that kind of stuff. But it is definitely a special bond now, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, Gordon Kennedy tells a story that he's still finding out about sessions that his dad played on. Is that something that you've found out, like, oh shit, Dad, I had no idea you played on that? Because it's so hard to keep track of what you've done in a body of work that spans, for your dad, I guess, 84 until present,
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's another thing. And I mean, my dad would say that he'd be the first one to say this. Like we've talked about it in depth. Is like, the reality is he never really did like become a part of the session world here. And he's one of those people we talk about. Like, I think at the end of the day, he found out he didn't really love that part of the job. He didn't love the part where people go, I don't like that. What else can you do? And he's a brilliant player, and has great hands and tones and thoughts and ideas. And I think that's all why he's part of what's made him a great producer, is his ideas. But having to show up and play on someone's like not great song, and the engineer's not great, he didn't love slugging that part of it out in the early part of his career. And I think that's why he moved very quickly into like, man, I'm just going to produce. I'm going to try to like make, connections here and do this. And so sorry, I gotta answer this one thing. Sorry if you edit that out. I just realized somebody's coming.
No worries.
Come pick up something. Yeah, so I mean, that was like I said, it's he'd be the first to say like he didn't really love those aspects of the job. And so, for that reason, he moved into production way earlier. And for me, it was always just like, I kind of like it. I don't mind being told to play something different.
Yeah. Yeah, and it seems like that was something for you. If you ever got into a circumstance where you were sitting next to Brent or JT or somebody like that, you knew what's the best way to compliment that particular scenario, or it was something you loved the variety of it, and you accepted the ups and the downs with it. That some days it feels like a race car, some days it's like being thrown around in a cement mixer. It just,
well, and the other part of that is so sorry, give you a good edit point. The flip side of that coin is I had been so reverent to guys like Brent Mason, JT Cornfloss, Kenny Greenberg, our sweet Tommy Bukovac, everyone's Uncle Larry, like the guys of that era. And I'd gotten myself to where I could do a pretty good impression of any of those dudes. And for a while, when I was starting to do sessions, a common thing would be, hey, we lost so-and-so because they had to go do a bigger record. Would you come play on this demo? And my instinct at the time was like, well, I know they love what he does. I'm going to give them that. I'm going to try to serve that up. And I do think that there were moments in time where that benefited me, but a really like a crucial moment in my career was a steel player, Russ Paul, pulled me aside after a session one day and he said, hey, you're really good at like kind of imitating all of our buddies. And he was like, but I've heard you do a thing that's you too. And he was like, you should just do that. Like you should do that. And then what I found happened when I kind of was able to hear that and do it, what it had been before was like, okay, well, they want Brent Mason. Brent can't do it. They get me. They get a B version of Brent Mason, or probably a D version of Brent Mason. And so they're only going to call me when Brent can't do it. But eventually, when I started kind of doing my thing, it was kind of like, you know what? We like him. I mean, Brent's our guy, but we like what Derek does too. Like, why don't we just have them both?
Yeah.
And I was really lucky that in the guitar chair, particularly in the electric guitar chair, that's one of the seats in sessions that you can sometimes have two guys, you know? Or I started to see guys like casting me for certain records, or you'd show up on certain days. And it's like, you know, well, so-and-so was here last couple of days because we were doing some real country stuff or whatever, but like, we really wanted you here for these days. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. And like I said, you know, everyone here's so good. Everyone can do a lot of things. It's not about being one dimensional, but when I started to kind of lean into some stuff that, you know, felt like mine, or, you know, or my influence coming out, and not thinking like, wonder what JT would play on this song. I definitely saw like the next level of my career open up for me.
It's thank goodness for somebody that would put, you know, think enough about you to say, hey man, like what you do. I'm aware that you can kind of do a version of what those guys are doing, but, you know, be yourself. You're going to be good, you know.
And it was coming from, you know, straight from the horse's mouth. I mean, Russ, for anyone that doesn't know, is a, you know, brilliant pedal steel guitar player, and he's so these diverse projects. He plays on like Black Keys records and all this stuff. But that's the dude that moved to town like 2 years after Paul Franklin and Dan Duggan.
Yeah.
And Bruce Boughton and you know, XYZ. And he learned that lesson. He was bestowing it onto me. And then he talks about playing in Vince Gill's band, and they did Crossroads, and he saw Jeff Beck live, and it like changed his whole life. And he went home and like took two of the pedals off of his steel that everyone used for the classic moves, and was like, if they want that, they're going to call Paul Franklin. So here's what Russ Paul is.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
And I didn't necessarily go that hard in the paint with it, you know, but yeah, you know, it carried so much weight when he said that to me, because that's a guy he had lived it.
Yeah.
And it was like, yeah, you know. So.
That's beautiful. It's it just goes to show that there's a lot of humanity in everything that we do. It's just, if you're lucky enough to be exposed to those kind of things, and just because I think we all are just trying to find our lane. And once we find our lane, even though there's ups and downs and construction and some off ramps and such, generally speaking, once you've got your lane and your groove, you feel like, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be, and being the best version of myself, you know?
Yeah, you know, and like I said, I feel really lucky that I feel like I found that, and, you know, at least carved out some sort of space for myself where people feel like they want to collaborate because they enjoy, you know, me around and my input, you know?
Yeah. This will probably be where I edit the end of it, but a couple of questions for you. Okay. I'm doing a thing called it's kind of like my buddy Jason Shadrick with Premier Guitar. They do the rig rundown thing. I'm also doing something like that, but also like in musician studios. Like, it's called Guitar Rig Review, and it's just reviewing everything from players, you know, studio setups to their live rigs, what have you. I'm going to be in Nashville in a couple months interviewing Adrian Ballou.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you'd ever be up for doing something.
Absolutely. Yeah, come here. You can come here. I know you can't see all the gear that's over here, but yeah, come over here, and absolutely happy to do that.
Yeah, awesome. The other thing is this, a little bit an odd thing. Would you mind saying, hey, this is Derek Wells, and you're listening to the Guitar Hang podcast with John Stancorb?
Yeah. Hey, this is Derek Wells, and you're listening to the Guitar Hang podcast with John Stancorb.
Perfect. Man, awesome. Well, I'm glad I had a chance to listen to your dad's interviews, and one of my earliest interviews when it was just audio was Zach Child. So I watched.
Love that guy, dude.
He's one of the nicest guys on the planet. Just
love that guy, man. I was a 21-year-old kid playing in Josh Turner's band, opening for Brad Paisley, and Zach was the tech and had my back, and like, just love that dude.
Yeah, he's an amazing guy. So, well, thanks.
Good talking to you, John. Call if you need anything else, man.
Thank you for tuning in to the Guitar Hang podcast. Conversations with noteworthy guitar players from around the world. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications to stay updated on our latest episodes.